right, thank you. So can everybody hear me okay? Great. So you've been hearing a lot at this conference about different types of things you can do to improve your speed, your accuracy, fewer errors, better products, the right type of products. And so everybody's been learning a lot of techniques. And what I want to talk about today is how you get those techniques put into practice. How do you do an improvement plan? So talk just a little bit about my background, why I got interested in this is I've been in technology for a good 30 years now. And I was always interested in how you can be a little bit better and a little bit better. I think one of the first experiences I had was in one of the Hewlett-Packard medical divisions. And I was a developer, and I was really focused that year, I think, on design reviews or something. It was a fairly small thing. And just convinced that this was what our group totally needed to do. And we had a corporate consultant come in, and they did a review of our whole company. Our whole division was about 300 people, and we had hardware and software and manufacturing, marketing. That was the whole thing. So think of a company of about 300. And they came in and did this analysis, and they came out with the decision that what the group needed to focus on was building the right product. And I was extremely annoyed because I really wanted to do those design reviews and have everybody doing them the right way. And I found after so I went away kind of disappointed, and a year later I realized they were right, doing the right product. I believe what came out of that effort of investigating the right product was the bright yellow defibrillator. One of the things we made was defibrillators, and if you remember back in the 80s and 90s, all of your computer equipment was this kind of beige color. Yeah, it was all beige color because that's the color the plastic normally is. And defibrillators were the same way. They were like beige or gray because that was the high impact plastic. But when you need a defibrillator, how fast do you need it? Right away. So you're looking around an ambulance or a hospital room that's crowded with equipment. Yeah, and it's all beige. So our HP division decided to try to make a yellow one. And it took quite a bit of work to get the right plastic that had the right properties and was this screaming bright yellow, and it just took the defibrillator market by storm. And that's, I think, a great example of some of the stuff David Husband was talking about. What your customers need? Well, they need to put their hand on it. They need to be able to put their hand on it right now when we need it. So I learned that design reviews were actually not the most important thing to do that year. And a lesson that I've kept over the time. So how many of you are doing Agile at your company? A lot. And when I started with Agile type methods was actually back in the 90s and did stage delivery and did evolutionary delivery. And then the Agile Manifesto was written after that. Interestingly, the people doing evolutionary delivery weren't involved in the manifesto, and I don't know why. But on and off over the next 15 years doing Agile, and I was always kind of frustrated that I didn't understand, I felt I didn't understand why it worked. And I could read lots and lots of books and reading books about chaotic, this and that, and came away still feeling kind of unsatisfied. And then about 8 years ago, I was introduced to second generation Lean. And some science and math behind workflow processing, explaining why doing your work in smaller batches with immediate feedback is better than doing it in large batches. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a big part of why Agile is working, is splitting the work into small batches. So how can we apply that? And once you understand those things, you can apply Agile in areas outside of software. You can apply it with hardware. You can apply it with pharmaceutical research, all kinds of things that are not actually software. So today I'm doing consulting in lean process improvement in Agile, and for these kind of edge applications. And I was introduced last year to the improvement kata and got the chance to have a year of practice with another consultant on applying the improvement kata, and I found it to be really interesting. So what I'm going to do is talk about kind of process improvement methods at the large scale and how they work, and what are some of the problems. And then what is the improvement kata? How does it work? It's a fairly large method, so there's a good bit of that. And how do you scale it up so it will work in an entire company? And then some of our experiences in the last year of trying to use the improvement kata specifically in a software or IT context. So before I go on, I think we've been just get a sense of who's here. So how many people here are developers? All right, and how many people here are product owners, business analysts, that kind of thing? Yep, great. And testers, quality engineers, always a good bunch of them at this conference. How about consultants, process improvement experts? Yep, and we've got some in some of your traditional, and any other roles I haven't said. So what else are you doing?
Product development technician,
So a product development technician, user experience, data scientist. That's a new one to me, great. And technical writers, we have any technical writers? No? Anything else? Customer service manager, great. So quite a variety. So today, process improvement. How many people have annual improvement plans at your company where you have to start at the beginning of the year and write a plan for the whole year? Yeah, so we have a number of you with annual improvement plans. And one of the things that is typical of these is that they assume that you can do a fairly detailed plan throughout the year, so you have milestones and you have this whole thing laid out kind of like you see here, Gantt chart or something. Some people do Hoshin planning for this. Some do process reengineering, Romer Brace. There's a bunch of different methods that you can use, but they're all pretty large scale. And then we've got a big group of people doing Agile. And so you end up with some conflicts. So have you seen conflicts? You get some conflicts. And it's not because Agile's not about improvement. Agile is very much about improvement. It's really focused on continuous improvement, and that's been in it since the manifesto was written. And for those of you who aren't doing Agile, typically what you have is a retrospective at the end of every sprint, and the sprints are only 2, 3, 4 weeks long. So at the end of every sprint, your team sits back and reflects on what's been working, what hasn't been working, what do we need to do more of, less of, or differently, and makes improvement plans. So Agile is very much about improvement. But the conflicts between annual planning and Agile come generally because there's two really different sets of assumptions going on about three things. One is, how well can you identify and plan a solution up front? What are your assumptions about that? Second one is, how much do you need to coordinate across teams? Can you have all the changes happening by telling each team go make changes and then it all adds up? Or do you need to have some coordination? And then, assuming you do need some coordination, what's the best way to do that when you're trying to organize across multiple teams? So annual planning has one set of assumptions, Agile has another set, and they conflict with each other. And there's good things and bad things about both sets of assumptions. I'd say they're both right in some ways and they're both wrong in some ways. So annual planning assumes that you know the path you take, that you can know it, that you can set out a goal a year from now and just move towards it and you're going to get there. And up to a point that works. And it's up to a point called the threshold of knowledge, is your threshold beyond which you actually don't know. You don't know what you need to change, or you don't know how long it will take to change, or what form the change should take. You may not even be sure what the causes of your problems are. So you've got the threshold of knowledge. So things usually go according to plan until you hit that threshold, and then this happens. You kind of wander off. And at that point, what I see especially in large companies, is one of three things happens. One thing that can happen is they conclude that they get up to that point and they stop and they replan. And so they throw away the planning that they did and they replan. And they go along until they hit another threshold, and then they stop and they replan again. So you're replanning over and over and over. So does this sound familiar? This is the same thing we see in waterfall development, the same exact thing. You do a lot of planning and it doesn't come to pass and you have to replan. So these companies typically do meet at least some of their goals, but at a considerable cost of all of this replanning, plus often a lot of frustration, a lot of blaming and finger pointing, like why wasn't this plan right in the first place, when it couldn't be right because you didn't have the information. The other two things that happen are not as useful. One is that you give up on the plan, and that's not that unusual, is people get frustrated and they just stop. And then the third one is something that happens in large companies. The people who are making the change, who are actually at the level where the change needs to be made, so the people who do the real work, they keep working on the change even though it isn't going to work. Sometimes this is because they don't know it isn't going to work, that they see what's happening in their team and they can't see the big picture, so they don't know. And so they keep going, and then seems like a reasonable thing to do, and there's nobody in charge of the big picture looking at it and going, oh wait, this isn't going to have the result we thought. And then other times, they do know it's not going to work, but it's an annual plan. They made a commitment. A lot of times these annual plans are tied into people's performance evaluations. So if it's tied into your performance evaluation, you made a commitment to make this process change, you're probably going to go ahead and make it, whether or not it does a lot of good for your company, because you made a commitment. And I've had people tell me straight to my face that they knew it wasn't going to make a difference, but they needed to do it because they had made a commitment. So all three of those things, not that useful. In Agile, you tend not to have that problem. So it's a poor assumption on the part of annual planning that you can know everything. Agile's assuming that you not only can't know anything, we're not even going to try to predict way out into the future. We're just going to do the changes a few weeks at a time. So that they don't end up having to throw out a lot of plans because not usually working very far beyond the threshold of knowledge. But what you do get is problem that I don't think you could probably read this in the back, but this middle picture down here, these are posters from actual retrospectives, and this middle one down here has a pattern that I've seen at a lot of retrospectives. People have a bunch of Post-its in the middle, and there's a pink circle around them, and this says people we can influence. And on the outside it says the soup. So all the stuff that we can't deal with. Sometimes they're a lot less polite about it than this. But here's what we can cover, and here's a whole bunch of stuff that we can't deal with. And that's an issue with team level retrospectives, that you have the people on the team have a certain sphere of influence, and in a large company that may not be enough to be able to get change to happen. So you have an Agile team and someone outside keeps coming and yanking away one of your members in the middle of a sprint to go do some other job. Do you have the influence to stop that? You know you should, that it should be stopped, but you don't know how to stop it. That's pretty common. Another effect that we get from all these independent changes is very frequently they're not coordinated to add up to a solution. So each team is fixing the thing that is the most important to them at this particular time. And if you have, say, testing in one group and development in another group, I know you're not supposed to in Agile, but I know a lot of people do. So they've got their development team with some embedded testers, but they've also got the system test team and maybe a deployment team. And they're looking at how they can get work to flow from their team all the way out to the deployment to the end user. You need some coordination between the groups. So each one working on what they believe is their biggest impediment independently doesn't mean that they're both going to look at flowing the work out to the customer at the same time. One might look at it in March, one might look at it in November. That's not very helpful. So you tend not to get the coordination that would enable you to end up at a given point. So that's the second thing that the assumptions are being made about. Do we need coordination? Annual planning, a lot of the traditional annual planning methods assume that you need maximum coordination all the time and all the plans just start at the top and go down, which is often kind of overkill. But the team level retrospectives, a lot of people have implemented them. Their assumption seems to be that you can just work at that team level and it'll somehow percolate up to the top. And then the third thing that assumptions are made about is how do you coordinate? If you are going to coordinate, how do you do it? So we got a picture here of a value stream. How many people know what a value stream is? Okay, so it's a new term for a lot of you. Value stream is a term that comes from Lean. And what it means is delivering value from the very beginning, the initial idea. Somebody has an idea for a feature, all the way out to the customer. So a change request or an idea at the beginning and all the way out. And you can see in a lot of large organizations, this is more than one team. You're going through a development team, you're going through a system test team, you're going through a deployment team, and that's actually a pretty simple value stream. And it's typical in a large company to have multiple value streams going on at the same time. So you have a value stream for, say, application changes for your customer-facing website. Great. And you have another value stream for application changes to your internal IT applications. And then you have a third value stream of people fixing emergency bugs in the customer-facing, which is different than new features, but oh my gosh, this has gone down and we need to go slap another index on here to get the speed back up to where it needs to be, that kind of thing. So organizations often have multiple value streams. If you want to speed up the value stream, so you can split up the work one of two ways. You can either split up the work across the value stream or by function. An awful lot of the traditional annual planning methods do this by function. The way Hoshin planning is taught in the United States usually does this by function. So they start with, we would like our whole organization to be much faster. Great. Development, you be faster. System test, you be faster. Deployment, you be faster. Okay, so all the system test groups report to one overall department manager, so that department manager gets a goal, and then all the system test groups get a goal, and it all seems really logical. The problem with this is, so here's our value stream. Here's some speeds on the value stream. How fast are jobs going to get out to the customer? 10 jobs a day. How many people think it's going to be 10? Yeah. How many people think it'll be more? Yeah, not too many. Yeah, the 10 is the choke point, so, or the bottleneck. The value stream can't run any faster than its slowest part. So is it going to do this company a lot of good to give the development team a goal to be radically faster? It's not going to do them any good. In fact, it's going to waste time. If they start looking at the whole value stream, say deployment, you need to be faster. And deployment goes off and looks at, well, why aren't we faster? What could we be doing that would change the speed? And one of the things they come up with is one of the reasons we're not faster is a lot of the applications that are given to us don't have complete install instructions. So we have trouble installing them, and we have to call back to, guess who, development, and ask them, what exactly did you mean here between step A and step B? There clearly is another step. What was it? So development does end up getting involved in the speed up, but what they're working on is probably not what they would have predicted if you gave them the goal of being faster. They're very likely to have looked at something that would speed up how fast they could write stories, not the quality of the install instructions. So to have a really efficient process improvement method, you'd like to basically be able to handle all of these things. You'd like to have a process improvement method that deals with all this uncertainty. My experience, process improvement is actually less certain than product development. And we spend a lot of time with Agile and everything talking about how product development, there's all these things we don't know about the customer, we don't know about the technology, and that's all true. Process improvement frequently has even less known about what's the actual problem, what are the causes of it, what are the possible solutions, and how well would they work for us in our company at our time with our people. And when you go around asking things like, well, what's the velocity of your process improvements? People usually have no clue. Nobody's been keeping track. So they don't have any idea how long it's going to take to implement anything. They have data about how many stories they can get done, but that's not necessarily applicable. So a good process improvement would handle uncertainty and not plan so far ahead as the traditional annual planning. And it would also scale up. It would be able to solve big problems. It would coordinate people. It would coordinate people by value streams. And as I said, most of the major annual planning methods, with the exception of the Rumler-Braish process engineering, that one does start with value streams. It uses a different name for them, but it's essentially what it's looking at. But an awful lot of them are splitting up by function or organization instead. So we'd like to have those. And I think the improvement kata is a pretty big advance in process improvement because it does do both of these things. It does scale up and it does deal really well with all of this unknowns. So the improvement kata is an iterative method that basically has 4 steps. And we're going to be looking at that in some detail. But before that, I'm going to talk a little bit about where it came from. So I think it's easier to understand with a little history. So where did it come from and why does it have such a funny name? This came out of mechanical engineering. And this was a product of research by Dr. Mike Rother, who works at the University of Michigan. And he, along with a lot of other people, are really interested in how Toyota in Japan has managed to successfully do a great deal of adaptation and continuous improvement in a variety of fields, not just manufacturing, but also their product development itself. How have they been able to do this for decades and decades? So he spent 5 or 6 years, probably with a bunch of graduate students, learning about what was going on at Toyota. And his questions were really around what were people thinking, what were they saying, what were they doing? And he didn't go in and find, oh, Toyota has this method, call it improvement kata. Toyota didn't have any name for this. They just thought of it as the way they did things. He was basically kind of excavating out of their training and following people around, watching them and asking, why are you doing that? Well, we always do this. Do you really always do it this same way? And why are you doing it? So what he wanted to do was find out how they were getting these results and what would, and capture them in a way that he could explain and make it possible to apply them in other companies. So what did they find? So these researchers found they were doing this continuous improvement using some tools which are fairly familiar. The first one's called go and see, or in Japanese, gemba. And in America, we often call this being data-driven. So it's saying, don't go make a decision based on a standard, this is the right thing to do, everybody knows, which is something I used to do a lot back in the 80s and 90s. Well, everybody knows we should have a design review process here. Everybody knows we should have a coding standard, and it should look exactly like, and I'm kind of embarrassed now about the coding standard wars that I engaged in the early 90s. But anyways, they're saying go and see what the process actually is, and if possible, measure it. Don't take people's word for it, measure it. He found that Toyota was splitting their process improvement into really small batches. And this is the fundamental thing, one of the 2 fundamental things that makes the improvement kata different from other process improvements methods is it's working in really small batches. So it's saying instead of trying to make a big plan to have a big giant improvement, we're going to make a small improvement that actually helps us and tells us more about our problems and then we'll make another improvement. So a lot the same as user stories, something that you can get value from almost immediately. And another tool is cadence. So planning, cadence means working on a rhythm. So having a staff meeting on the same day of every week at the same time is working on a cadence. And why do you like to have staff meetings at regular, predictable times? You can plan for the staff meeting. You can plan to be there. You can plan to not be there. You can plan, something has come up. I will save this for the staff meeting because I know it's tomorrow. I don't need to go pull an emergency meeting to deal with this. So cadence, very useful. And we use cadence in Agile all the time. So these tools were all ones that were already being used in Agile under different names. So the small batches, user stories are a small batch of a feature. And they're actually wrapped into a bigger batch called the sprint, which is done on a cadence at a regular, predictable time. First time I did anything like Agile was stage delivery, and we didn't use a cadence. We actually had different length iterations. If I'd known then what I know now, we would have made them the same length, but we didn't know that. And then user demos. We don't take the marketing people's word for it that what we've made is what the customer wants. We try hard to get a customer to actually see it and tell us, is that what you wanted? Is this what you can use? Tell us how this fits into your life. So they found those things, and they also found a couple of other things that are not used in Agile, or at least not under these names. So one of them was heavy use of scientific method, or plan, do, check, act, being able to, and I'll be giving some examples of how this is used. So you're using the scientific method to understand whether change is working or not, and they're using a kata. So a kata is a word, again, Japanese word for a practice routine that helps you learn a skill. So you often have a coach helping you to practice your kata. One kata that I've used is, how many of you play an instrument or sing or have in the past? All right, so you've had music classes. So you think back to some of your very early music classes, and one of the things you learned was counting, which I believe is a kata for music. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and you remember if you're in band, your band instructor, no, you are all off. I want you to follow this, and it's just sitting there with a baton. 1 and 2 and 3 and all together. So you practice it and practice it and practice it. Eventually, I am told, you get good enough that you don't need to count consciously anymore. You have mastered the skill, and it's in the back of your brain running somewhere, this counting. I don't know, I'm still having to count out loud. But that's an example of a kata. It's something that you practice to help you learn a skill. And eventually, you hope it becomes unconscious, and you can get more creative and think about dynamics and interpretation instead of staying on the beat, because you know how to stay on the beat. So that's some of the stuff behind the improvement kata. The improvement kata basically has 4 steps. You start out with setting a direction or challenge. And if you're dealing with annual planning, that may be a direction or challenge for the whole year. So we want to get 10x quality improvement over the next year. That would be a challenge. That would be a very big challenge. Grasping the current condition. Where are we now? This is actually done in most process improvement methods. They start out with, well, where you want to go, where are you now, like how big is the distance? And then you have an iterative set of establishing a target condition that's not very far beyond your threshold of knowledge and iterating to get there, and then setting another target condition and iterating to get there. And the rest of this talk is basically examples about how to do this. So you start with setting a direction, and that's usually six months to a year out, and then you look at the current condition. So your current condition, you're really asking, how effective is our process now? And you concentrate on the bottom line. not on what is our process like, but what are the results. If you're talking about quality, then what are the quality results? How many defects do you typically have? You know, defect density, that kind of thing. If you're talking about speed or market share or velocity, getting measurements for those things. So that, and this is where some of the go and see comes in, is using actual measurements, not people's opinions about how fast it is or whatever. And then establishing a target condition. This should be just a step on the way to the challenge. And it's a step that is stated in terms of the bottom line. So it's not saying we are going to, we have a solution in mind and we're going to implement this solution part way. Instead it's saying I want to get part of the way to the goal. So this is used pretty heavily in manufacturing and in healthcare. And one of the places in healthcare you might use it would be a hospital. So if a hospital is trying to drive their infection rate way down, it's like we don't need people to go to a hospital when they're sick and then pick up an infection from the hospital. This really does not make anyone happy. So hospitals using lean in the improvement kata to drive their infection rate down, they look at, we'd like the infection rate to be dramatically lower. Here's what we know about infections now. Here's what the rate is, and here's the different types of infections that we're getting infections from lack of hand washing, we're getting infections carried on equipment, we're getting infections we're not sure where they're coming from, but they're all this certain bacteria, so you have some different groups. And a target condition there would be to pick one group and say, our target condition is to eliminate this group. And we won't worry about the other ones for now. We'll just work on this one group. So you work on that one group and eliminate it, and you've done some good. Already your infection rate is lower, and you haven't done a big study about every type of infection there could possibly be. You've just focused on one thing. And you've focused on it across the doctors, the nurses, the cleaning people, everybody that's involved. And so in software, we're looking at the same thing. If you were looking at quality, you'd be looking at taking a particular category of defects and focusing on where are these coming from, how are they getting into the code, and how could we prevent them or find them a lot sooner so they don't end up in the customer's hands. And just look at one category and work gradually. So one of the things that you find is that once you have gotten to a target condition, you know more about your situation, and you can, your next target condition will probably be influenced by what you've learned. So an example with Agile, people who are adopting Agile for the first time usually have a goal around, like, we want to be faster, we want to be flexible, we want to be reliable. I haven't put any numbers in here, but you really want to have some numbers here. How much faster do you want to be? How would you know you were being flexible? What does that mean? What does reliable mean to you? One of the things reliable usually means is meeting sprint commitments, and that's often a struggle for people who are starting out. So what's your current condition? Say your current condition is you're only meeting 60% of your sprint commitments. Not a real happy place. So how are we going to get to this nirvana of fast and flexible and reliable and awesome, and our CEO is all happy with us? We look for a target condition that's just part of the way there. And you've got fast and flexible and reliable. For now, we're going to focus on the reliable. And we're not even going to say we're going to be 100% reliable. We're just going to try to be somewhat more reliable. And then ask, why are we not being reliable now? What's in our way? What are the impediments or the obstacles to this? So, number of possibilities. People come and interrupt you in the middle of a sprint. How many people get interrupted in the middle of a sprint? Yeah. You have people who actually report to more than one department called matrixing. Matrix management, that's people, and they're actually taken away during a sprint. That really doesn't help your scheduling. Starting testing, when people are first adopting Agile, they're often doing unit testing and it's test-driven development, but then there's some system or integration testing, and that's not happening until pretty late, maybe internationalization testing, things like that. It doesn't happen till really late in a sprint, and you find a defect. On the last day of the sprint, guess what? You're not meeting your commitment. You can't. It's just too late. So you pick one to work on, and picking one target or one thing to work on to be your target condition means you're focusing, your whole group will be focusing just on that. And it's good to start with one that's actually within your realm of control. So if you're an agile team, you probably have some control over when you're sending things to system test, whereas interruptions from outside you may not have any control over. So we start with the easier one. And okay, we're going to try and get to 80%. We're going to try to start the system test by the midpoint of the sprint, so we have a little bit more time to fix bugs that are found. So the target condition helps people focus. They stop arguing over what they should change. And there's a lot of things you could change, and a lot of them are good ideas. So it's not saying that any of them are bad ideas. It's saying right now we're going to put these on the shelf and we're going to focus on this one. And it also helps with the people who want to have, say, design reviews, because we know everybody else has design reviews and it's a good thing, and we just read an article about it and it's really cool. So process for its own sake. You have to demonstrate that whatever you're proposing as a change is actually going to take you to that target condition. So you're starting with where you'd like to be and working backwards, what would get me there, rather than saying, I'd like to make this change and it's going to have all these great effects. So you're focusing on which obstacle are we addressing. And at this point, we have a kata, or a practice pattern. And this is called the learner storyboard. What this does is help everybody focus on what's going on without having to do a lot of writing. So this is a type of visual planning, actually. You write down your challenge, what process it is, what team, who are we trying to change, and what's our current condition, we're not meeting our commitments. Outcome metrics, the metrics that are measuring the bottom line or the outcome or result of the process, what actually matters to the CEO of your company. I think David Hussman was referring to them, the people who want to know, is it done? What do they care about? Well, what's your output? Your throughput is how many stories you get finished per sprint, and what percentage of your commitment is that? Whoops. And then setting a target condition. And stating what your outcome metrics will be. Notice that one of them's gone up and one of them has stayed the same. That's like a balanced scorecard type of thing where you don't want to make one thing better and make something else worse. So a lot of times you're tracking 2 or 3 metrics, and 2 of them you're not trying to change, you're just making sure that things aren't going to go south and you didn't know it. And then you look at, specifically, we think we're going to change when we're starting testing, so when are we starting it? Let's go, again, Gemba, go and see the actual process. And then look at and then set a target condition for where you would like that to be. We would like to start earlier. How do we think we would have to do that? And at that point, you have a target, but you haven't necessarily said how you're going to get there. And you may, in fact, not know how you're going to get there. This is something you see come up fairly often in team-level retrospectives, that people have identified a problem, but in the hour or 30 minutes or however long you have for your retrospective, you actually don't have enough time, or you may not have the right people there to figure out what the solution is. So you have a goal to not have this problem anymore, but you don't necessarily have a solution. So what the improvement kata does is have you iterate towards the target condition in really, really tiny steps. And this is basically using science. So you're admitting that you don't know exactly how to get to your target condition. And if you knew how to get there, honestly, you'd probably already have gone there already. It's not like we sit around and do things inefficient ways just because we like to. Generally, we don't know how to get there, or there's some big obstacle in the way that we don't know how to overcome. So we assume that we don't know necessarily how to get there, and we do one experiment every day to take us towards that goal. And This is called the plan, do, check, act pattern. And the words plan, do, check, act are used in a lot of other process improvement methods. They typically are looking at cycles a lot longer than a day or two. The plan, do, check, act is pretty much the scientific method. The scientific method's been with us since the 1600s or earlier. The first person to call it plan, do, check, act was Walter Shewhart in the 1930s. And so you see sometimes plan, do, check, act or plan, do, study, act. They're basically all saying the same thing, is you have a hypothesis, what you think is going to happen. So if I do this, I think this is going to happen. What actually happens, compare what actually happens, what you thought was going to happen with what actually happens. What have you learned? It's like, what else does this sound like? It always sounds a lot like testing to me. It's like, I figure if I push this button, this is what I expect to see, and what do I actually see? And if it's different, what have I learned about the system? So it's a method especially exploratory testers follow a lot. And the difference between what you expected and what you find is where learning occurs. In process improvement, we need to do a lot of learning. We need to learn a lot about the process that we're changing. We often don't know anywhere near enough to be going in and messing with it, and all these unexpected things happen because we didn't know how people were really doing the work at the day-to-day level at their desk. What is it really like? The description that the company has says one thing, and when you ask people what they're really doing, it's like, well, yeah, that's pretty much what happens, but what really is, and then I get these extra things, and I always have to call back to the requester and find out what they really needed. And oh yeah, it's also a little difficult to do this type of network change because you have to submit a ticket for it ahead of time, and it doesn't actually say that in the process, but I know that. Anybody who's ever tried to automate a process that was being done manually, you find this out in spades. It's never what people tell you it is when you start. You go round after round trying to figure out what it is they're really doing. So we have a kata for this. And we have a kata because it's complicated, takes a bunch of steps, and also because the learning is kind of hard to do. So the kata is, or pattern is the PDCA cycle record. And have the person who is going to make the process change is called the learner. And they are basically a scientist investigating this process. So they write up their experiment. What am I going to try? What do I expect to see when I try it? Pretty simple, it should only take you a couple minutes. And then you go do it, and then you come back to your paper and you write, what did I actually see, and what did I learn? So this sounds like it's really simple, and it sounds like it would be kind of a waste actually maybe to do it, but it turns out it's not nearly as simple as it looks. Right, you do what you saw and what are you going to try next. So if you're going to start testing sooner, it would go like this. You tell the team to, yeah. So the manager says, yep, we should definitely start testing sooner. I'm just going to tell the development team, start sending stuff over to the system test team at the midpoint of the sprint. And so what do you think is going to happen? It's like, unfortunately, what the managers often think is, wow, it'll just work. So magic occurs. So what do you think actually happens? A number of different things can actually happen. One of the things that can happen is you do send some stories in, and the system test people say, oh, very good, we have some stories, but we're not ready to test them. Why not? Because I don't have the browsers and the mobile phones that I need for this particular test. I have to go get them. That'll be tomorrow, or maybe the next day. So then you're all like, well, development did their job, so what happened here? So what have we learned? Unfortunately, most people do not stop at this point naturally and say, what have I learned? Instead, they say, what am I going to do next? And when I'm first helping people learn this, they actually, I'll ask them, what did you see? And they'll tell me what they saw, and without even breathing, they don't even take a breath, they tell me what they're going to do next. We're trained to do this, to move on. Go fever, I think one of our previous speakers referred to as keep moving. So they zip right on to what are you going to try next? And we do this for a good reason. So what do you see here? What's it say? Yeah, it looks like it's jumping to conclusions, but it's not. But if I put that bar back in, it's really difficult not to still see jumping to conclusions. This is because your brain is programmed to do this. Your brain wants to get wants to see patterns and fill in the blanks. So it's filling in the blanks. You can drive, and this is a really, really useful skill. You can drive because your brain fills in the blanks really fast. You can ride a bike because your brain fills in. You can run away from tigers. These are useful survival skills. Maybe not the tigers so much today, but staying out of the way of the giant semi-trailers, yes. So we've evolved to be able to make these very rapid, unconscious, fill in the blank, keep moving, and we can't turn it off easily. So if you cross your arms, try crossing your arms just like this. Okay, now cross your arms the other way. Yeah, I have trouble even getting to the other way. So how did that feel? Yeah, it's a little awkward. It feels odd. It feels odd, and it takes longer because you have to think about it. You have to think about it very deliberately. And this is using more energy in your brain. A bunch of these slides actually came from Mike Rother, who has much more background than I do in neuroscience. And he's pointing out that the unconscious thinking goes fast because your synapses are all trained, it's all laid into your brain. When you stop and do something deliberate, it's going to take longer and it's going to cost more. So your brain is always trying to go to that unconscious method because it's cheaper. And if you'd sat around doing it the slow way all the time, the tigers would eat you. So there's good reasons to act this way, but what it means is if we are going to learn to stop and think about what we learned every single time we make a change, we're probably going to need some practice. And this is where Mike Rother found people were using a kata, and he thinks this is probably the most important kata in the entire improvement kata, is reflecting with a coach. And the coach is not there because they know more about the process. Often they don't. At Toyota, it's typically the manager coaching the individual or coaching someone who reports to them. We've also seen people doing it at a peer relationship. But the coach's job is to help the learner slow down and think about what they learned. So the kata is on a card that they carry, which you see a picture of the card here, asking you to reflect on the last step you took. So what did you plan as your last step? And the person answers. And what did you expect to see? What happened? And what did you learn? So at this point, this is an example I saw. It was pretty amazing watching people use this for the first time. When I first saw it, honestly, I thought this is overkill, this is silly. Why are we going to all this trouble? And then I helped people use it, and I saw behavior, I saw amazing skill level building that I hadn't expected at all. For instance, one of the things, if you've done process improvement for a long time and you've taught it, one of the things you learn is that it doesn't do a lot of good to spend a week writing out an elaborate new process because it's almost, without reviewing it with anybody, because it's almost certain to be wrong. So you do a rough draft and get feedback. But most people will start doing the elaborate process because that's just where people start. It seems more reasonable to them. So with the improvement kata, somebody gets started, they're working in a system test group, and they keep getting these installs that don't work. The installs keep failing. One of the reasons the installs is failing is because somebody made a network change on the networks in the system test lab and didn't report it. So some of the people doing this are outside the lab. So they decide that these people outside the lab need to fill out a form before they make a change so that the system test group knows about it. It's like, seems logical, yes? So someone the learner sits down and writes the process. And that person sends out the process. And what they expect to see is, I'll send out the process and I'll give it to these other guys. And the other guys will follow the process, and that will help. But what actually happened was the team did not like the process. And in fact, you get this email firestorm, and they're all arguing, well, what are you trying to do? You're really going to slow down. I don't have time to fill out all these forms. I make a whole lot of these changes. If you don't have the coach, the person tends to jump very quickly to the other team is bad and not cooperative, and really we should just make them do this. You stop and have the coach asking, what did you learn? Well, what I saw was people stop and actually look at it from the other point of view. What happens when, what's this other team doing? So stop and think and see that this new process is causing problems. So not logical next step is go ask them about the problems, rewrite the process. And you get the same thing if you start testing sooner. You see, well, if the test beds aren't ready, let's go ask why they aren't ready. Well, maybe because we never told the testers what the browsers would be. So gosh, why don't we put that in our acceptance tests? And that should work better. We should get some tests that actually say, oh, you're going to need to get these phones. But then some of them still aren't ready. So what happened? Go ask the testers again. So we gave you an acceptance test. Why didn't you go get the equipment? Oh, well, I didn't understand what equipment you needed, because some of them were fine, but some of them had these little shorthand scribbles on them. So please tell us what it is you want. And whoops. And so on. So it goes on like that. And if you're thinking this actually looks like a lab notebook, it is. It's exactly a lab notebook, except for some reason they have the hypothesis second. Usually in a lab notebook, you'll do a hypothesis experiment. But people who have had some science training do find this easier to pick up, I think, because it's a kata they've already practiced. So we have a single team that can use the improvement kata productively doing retrospectives. You can use the plan, do, check, act sequence to help you move faster towards the goal. So you have a retrospective. It comes up with actually usually a pretty short-term goal. And if you aren't really sure how you would get there, you're not sure what's causing the impediment, the plan, do, check, act can be a very useful way to get there. Or you can see that you need to make a process change and it's not real clear what the details would be. So again, what's the smallest thing that would possibly work? Do that, see if it works, then try a more complicated one. So our person who is trying to get a better process for understanding what the network changes are doing a very simple draft and trying it out on 1 or 2 people would be a lot faster and immediately get the feedback that, oh, this isn't going to work exactly this way, but how about if you exclude this category of changes, we don't think they're hurting the network, and we do them a lot. It's like, oh, yeah, that's probably true. Just don't fill out a form. Fill out a form for these things, because those are the ones that tend to really bollocks things up. So you want to move one step at a time. So during the break, one of the questions was, well, if you do this, how do you balance off locally optimizing individual teams and then having that not optimize the whole system? And so that's what I'm going to talk about now, is how do you scale this up? So we need to have teams aligned to work on the same thing at the same time, and they need to have a view of the entire system. So again, we want to go back to the value stream, and this is one of the key things in the scaling up the improvement kata, is that you're going to focus on optimizing the value stream, not individual teams. So you have to have a view of the value stream. And unlike our colleagues in manufacturing, we don't generally have a view of the value stream. So one of the first things we do is get people to draw their value stream. So this is one for an IT service request group. So this is actually a very small value stream. But even so, it has some interesting parts. You're tracking the work from the initial idea that somebody has, in this case it's asking for help with something, all the way through to being done. And this group, this is an actual group, has a couple of people who just take requests and they come in via email, and they have a ticketing system, but an awful lot of people go around the ticketing system. So they get tickets, but they also get email requests and phone requests and people who drop in and want something. And they go through these requests trying to figure out what's the person want, what's going to solve their problem. Some of them should have read the online documentation, so you refer them to the documentation and you're done. Some of them, however, need an actual change, so the people doing the clarifying file a ticket if there isn't one already, and they've got all their tickets in here. And then they have 3 different groups of people who manage tickets. One does network changes, and one's doing security problems, and one is issuing application licenses and so forth to new employees. So 3 different sets of skills and technology and resources. So you've actually got 3 value streams that are all going at one point through the same group. And that's pretty common to have a value stream that has some resources that are shared with another value stream. So until you have this picture, you generally don't know what's going on. And I found even before I was doing the improvement kata, when I was doing other methods that involved drawing a process map, that simply drawing the process map often caused a considerable amount of improvement. You would find that people, 2 different teams would have a handoff between them, and they wouldn't have an agreement. They thought they had an agreement about the handoff, but if you asked one group, they said one thing, and if you asked the other group, they thought something different. And so they didn't have a clear handoff. Sometimes you draw these pictures, or have people draw these pictures, and they realize that there's a possible shortcut for some of their jobs, that they're sending jobs through steps that don't need to be done, and that if they had a decision point earlier on, they could route some of them around and get them done faster. Sometimes they look at it and go, this is just silly. This is way more complicated than it needs to be. It's like, okay, well, what could be done to simplify? But until you have the picture, it's really hard to do anything. So with the improvement kata, I try to start the picture at the top level, the highest level that this is going to be applied at. Sometimes that's the whole company, sometimes it's one department within a company. But you start with the same improvement kata pattern, the same storyboard, and the plan, do, check, act. So you're starting with a manager, second or third level or so manager, that's going to say, this is the challenge for the whole year, and here's where I'd like to get at the end of the quarter. And we aren't going to worry about where we're going to get for the second quarter, and third quarter, and fourth quarter. We're just going to talk about first quarter. So here's where we want to be at the first quarter. And that then goes down to each value stream. So a manager in an IT department may have a value stream for the service requests and value stream for people who are doing application changes for customer-facing web apps and people who are doing maintenance work on customer-facing web apps. They may have 5, 6, 7 different value streams going on at the same time. So he or she can call together the value stream managers and say, each one of you is now a learner. My target condition for the quarter is your challenge, and then you set a challenge, and this actually is a collaborative relationship. It's not, I'm just telling you what your challenge is. It's generally a much more of a discussion over what would be practical, and that's one of the things we're going to go through in the workshop in more detail is how do you actually do that? How do you get a collaborative decision going on what would be a sensible goal for this quarter, and then the value streams probably breaking it down to a sensible goal for the month. And at the process level is where people actually work, where real work happens. So no managers, real people. Oh, sorry, managers, but people who are doing things, and they are the ones who know the process and need to change the process. So they're figuring out what they need to change. And so they have, so what you end up with is this hierarchy of storyboards where they flow down. You've got the annual plan is a big one and doesn't change much. And then at the value stream level, you have what's my goal for my value stream for this, this iteration. And then the process level ones are usually running on a level more like a couple of weeks. And they may finish 2 or 3 storyboards by the time the value stream condition is met and that proceeds forward. So you have coaching going on between the process level folks and the value stream owner. The value stream owner is often their manager, but not always. And with the amount of matrixing, matrixed organizations that I see, sometimes you end up with really odd-looking relationships there where it's like, I don't care what your organization is, I don't care who reports to who, I want to know who has responsibility for this value stream. Unfortunately, sometimes the answer is, well, we don't think anybody really does. It's like, okay, well, then you're going to have to give somebody at least temporary responsibility. You can't fix something that nobody is taking care of. So it needs an owner. So you have people working at the process level are talking to the value stream owner, and the beauty of that is the value stream owner then is a coach for more than one person. So the coach, the value stream owner is a coach for a learner in development and a learner in system test and a learner in deployment. So that person is in a position to notice that a change being made in deployment is going to need a corresponding change in test. Sometimes they're doing this in a proactive way where they're setting a goal that they know the two of them are going to need to collaborate, and they can tell them, you two need to collaborate, and each of you come up with, in order to meet this, say testing needs to start sooner, what has to happen in test, what has to happen in development. Each of you come back with your piece. And yes, it's fair to talk to each other. That's great, we want you to. And then sometimes it's reactive. The development group is cruising along, making a change, and they run into a problem, and it looks like it involves the stuff coming from the business planning group, so they can go to their coach and say, I've run into an obstacle, and the coach is like, well, okay, the business planners are coming through me as well, so I can go talk to them about what part they should be playing in this. So you've got some coordination. And then likewise, things that are going across value streams. For instance, if you have an application value stream, and they're making major changes to your customer web-facing applications, right? And you have a maintenance value stream that's making changes to the same application. And the maintenance is, fixing some things that have to be done because the security level, people discover a new hack and you need to make a security change and so forth. But they're also fixing bugs. And so where did those bugs come from? They came from the development value stream. So the development value stream and the maintenance value stream do have an effect on each other. And this person is in a position to see that. So the improvement kata has deliberately set up these layers such that the people have the visibility and are responsible for checking on what's going on a regular, frequent basis. So these coaching meetings are happening every couple of days. These coaching meetings might be more like once a week, but they're able to keep adjusting their plans because they're getting regular information. So they actually do a PDCA sheet at this level, and it's less concrete than the ones the process level people do. All the examples I've shown you so far are process level PDCA, and the management value stream level ones tend to be more around how do I get, I've discovered that the interaction between these two value streams isn't going well. How do I decide how do I get the right people on this? Or I had one of the common ones is I had a learner down here and they disappeared, quit or something, and we need to get a replacement learner, so we need to restaff. And that's the kind of thing managers end up dealing with. So you can do this scale up, and they're doing the same pattern at every level. They're doing the same 4 steps, using the same language, writing a learner storyboard, doing a plan, do, check, act, having coaching meetings. The topics get more strategic as you go up. But it's still trying to do everything on a very frequent basis in small batches. So that's how the improvement kata is supposed to work. And what I did over the last year, along with a colleague, Adam Light, whom I don't think is here right now because he had another commitment he had to make, but he will be at the lunch leading a table on this topic, and I'll be leading a table on this topic as well. So there are 2 tables talking about process improvement and other related things. So he was the person who wanted to try the improvement kata, and the reason he thought it would be really effective is it was shown to be effective in manufacturing and healthcare already. And we're both working in lean. We both know that a lot of things that are effective in manufacturing and healthcare, if you understand why they're working, can be adapted to be useful in software. And we're also, by the way, seeing things go the other direction, that methods that were developed in Agile are showing up in lean because lean people and Agile people are talking to each other, and stand-up meetings are a great example of something that's come out of the Agile world of practice that is now being used in manufacturing and mechanical engineering lean applications. So, hypothesis was that the improvement kata ought to really be helpful in IT and software development process change because it addresses those problems of the annual improvement plan that you need to have coordination in a big organization, and you need it to be by value stream, and you need it to, ideally it would not be a big, huge waterfall style plan, but it would be an Agile plan with small iterations. So what did we try? What actually happened, and what did we learn? And believe me, through the year that we spent doing this, we spent a lot of time saying to each other, and so what did you learn? What did we learn just now? And we learned a lot. So we're using this with some IT departments that were, I think, pretty typical. They have the customer-facing and internal-facing applications. They're web-based, have a good large chunk of legacy code. These were all places that had multiple teams, so several software development teams and a system test team and a deployment team and maybe some other teams. Not necessarily all Agile, but some Agile. And that helped because the language was more familiar. And of course they had annual improvement goals that were ambitious. You very rarely find a place that doesn't have upper management that really wants something ambitious. And weren't already using a formal improvement planning method. So they were doing retrospectives generally, but weren't doing a Hoshin planning or anything like that. So they were doing annual improvement plans using basically classic project planning. So we tried doing it with the improvement kata instead, believing this would be much more effective. So took the existing annual planning goal and used that as the challenge. So I didn't try to come up with a new way to do the goals, like whatever your company's been doing, we assume it's great, and it seems like a decent goal. One of the things we ran into was companies that had multiple goals, like 7 or 8 annual goals. And 2 ways you can address that to get the focus. One way is to just pick one and work on it as the first target condition and see if the others fade when you make progress on one. Sometimes they do. Or you finish one and can start on others. The other thing was to take them and look and see if there was a common cause. I saw this a lot, that there would be 4 or 5 goals, say 5 goals, and 4 of them actually had the same cause. They were all symptoms of the same problem. So if you replace those 4 with a statement that our goal is to get rid of this problem, and here's what it would look like if we didn't have this anymore, then that actually produced clarity for a lot of people. And then they liked that. Then grasping the current conditions. So you're supposed to go get these bottom line results. And all of the books that we read about the improvement kata and the training that we went to on the improvement kata, a lot of manufacturing people running around, believe me, they have measurements. They have a lot of measurements. And we ended up using just a few simple measurements. We did the throughput and cycle time. And this was a challenge to get for many groups. They were measuring velocity inside one team. So they could tell you what the velocity was in their development team. They couldn't tell you what the average velocity was or throughput to take to get jobs from being requested to being delivered. And this is a really common problem that I see with Agile groups is each one has their own independent measurements. They don't have any measurements over the entire value stream. So they work themselves into these situations of, here's my development team just going like crazy, and here's my deployment team at half the speed. And the development team is really frustrated that what they do never reaches the customer because the deployment team's a lot slower. It's like, you're really not doing much there. So these were popular, were outcome metrics that we used a lot. What we found was that in manufacturing, they typically started with a value stream map. They already had one, and they had all these detailed measurements on it, like pitch and takt time and all this stuff. And our groups generally didn't have a value stream map and didn't have any measurements that went across the whole value stream. So we learned that just getting the map made a lot of change, which was, as I said, not a surprise because I'd done this a lot before. And so I'd add them and doing the maps. It's like, well, that's no surprise. That helps. It should. And it did. And just to get one or two metrics. So again, the simplest thing that could possibly work. And we found the improvement kata method with the constant asking about the current condition and the target condition would eventually lead people to getting useful metrics. Later on, if the initial metric wasn't enough, the method kind of automatically pulled them to a place where they would think, I need the second metric, let's go do that one. But just going in and putting in a bunch of metrics was not good. We also discovered that there's two definitions of cycle time out on the internet. This was a surprise, and we had a couple weeks of real confusion where we're saying cycle time and they're saying cycle time, and we're talking about two different things. That was not pretty. If you read the paper, I think I have a little bit more specifics on that one. So then we went to doing the target condition. So the target condition is actually pretty challenging. I think it's the most challenging part of this whole method, is figuring out where you should try and go without locking yourself into a solution, without making assumptions about the right solution. So we did the storyboards. We found those to be quite useful. We found that the training material didn't really say a lot. It said a lot about what was a good target condition and what wasn't. So you had a lot of existence proofs there, but it didn't have very much good advice on how to come up with a target condition. So what we did quite a lot was have the group brainstorm impediments. It's like, this is your challenge. This is where you would like to be in 6 months. What's in your way? Okay, here's a whole list of stuff that's in your way. Pick what looks like the easiest one, and let's see if we can make that a target condition. Imagine what it would be like not to have that problem, and then we'll write that as the target condition, and then we'll do the plan, do, check, act to see how we would get there. So we didn't have to know how to get there. And that's really key in this, is you don't have to know how to get there. You can set a target condition that you don't know how to get to and then work towards it. In some cases, people did find that their first target condition was actually setting up a throughput measure for the value stream, that they had no measurements at all and needed to set up a measurement. And that's kind of frustrating as a target condition, because at the end, you have metrics so you know more about your system, but you haven't actually made your system act differently yet. And it would be preferable not to have to spend time doing that, but sometimes it was necessary. And then iterating towards the target condition. So we did the PDCA cycles pretty religiously, and we started out by being the coaches ourselves and having the learners practice. And once somebody had been a learner for a while, they were able to be a coach. So at first we had managers being learners so that they could then learn to be a coach. And then eventually the companies had chains of learners and coaches that had been trained and knew what to do. So this was the most surprising part of the whole method, was watching this come together and watching the changes. I've taught process improvement quite a few times. I've done mentoring and I've done actual training, and I have not seen people learn as fast as these people did. And they went and tried things and realized that they didn't work, figured out generally for themselves why they didn't work. I wasn't there telling them. I would be asking, what have you learned? And sometimes nudging a little bit, well, what do you think is going on in this other group that's making that happen? But not more than that. And they'd come up with conclusions like, boy, I need to know more what's going on in this other group, and I probably shouldn't have done such a long process to begin with. I should just do a draft. And then I'd see them apply it a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later. And that was the really amazing thing, is seeing that the learning took hold and people were able to apply it in new situations later, which is the real test of any learning, is can you use it, and not just can you repeat back to me what I told you, but can you apply it to a new situation usefully and get something out of it. So we saw a really significant improvement in people who were not getting really any sustained training on how to do process improvement. They were getting a bunch of training on lean, but they were doing the process improvement pretty much with the PDCA, and they got a lot better very fast. So that was really impressive. In manufacturing, they do these coaching meetings every day. We did not. We did them 2 to 3 times a week. What it looked like to me was that the pace in manufacturing, that they're spitting out 30 widgets an hour, they have a lot of feedback. You make one change, you can see an hour later what happened. In the software development world, most of the time it took a day or two to see what had happened, sometimes longer. So we struggled a lot with getting changes to be small enough that you could see what happened in a day or 2 days. And it was possible. A lot of it was very reminiscent of the first time people start doing user stories and they're just saying, no, we can't possibly do anything that tiny. It's like, yeah, we're going to try it. And you find that you can, and the same thing happened with this. We found that if you didn't do the coaching meetings at least twice a week, people stopped working on the process improvement. If you tried to do steps that would take them more than about 30 minutes a day, they wouldn't have time. Their main job was, they needed to do their main job, and so again, you would just lose momentum. If you skipped meetings, you would lose momentum and stop. So so that's what we did there. We learned that without a coach, they really didn't make the same progress. Some groups, the coach, went away, and so they tried doing it without a coach, and we found that they just did not make that same progress. What Dr. Rother is saying about the tendency to go back to the unconscious thinking looks like it is indeed really strong, and without months of practice of saying, what did you learn, what did you learn, what did you learn, before it becomes automatic. We did see that the coach didn't need to know what the right answer was in the process improvement. In fact, it was better if they didn't keep pushing this improvement or that improvement. Just help the learner sit back and breathe and think about what they learned and stay in the kata, keep doing the kata. So we did see some people doing this coaching with peers. I think that would work. It seemed a lot actually like pair programming, the way that works. We found they needed to be a learner. On the scaling up, you can scale this up with a whole bunch of layers. We didn't do that. What we did, this is the most number of layers we did. The learners often were a technical lead or a scrum master or a process lead of some kind, And usually the value stream person was a manager of some sort, sometimes the manager of the learner, but sometimes not, and then a director. And that's what we tried. We did the hierarchy of storyboards. We added this fuzzy looking thing at the bottom. I found that people were having trouble seeing when they had made a change. They'd be doing these little steps, little steps, little steps, little steps, and it's like, you solved the problem. You've reached your target condition. Stop. Celebrate. Write a success card to show your colleagues what you have achieved. And we were trying to get some feeling for how long it would take to get these changes. So we asked them to write down how long did it take. The median there seemed to be around 8 or 10 days. And what were you trying to do? What did you end up doing? And why is this useful? So that was another thing that we had to keep emphasizing with people is keep saying, you need to know why it was useful. If it doesn't have value, then it wasn't worth doing. So what was the value? What did you get out of this? And yeah, the manufacturing, I think this is easier if you have a value stream map and stuff in place, as far as I can tell. The matrix management that's used a lot in the software groups does make it harder to see anybody in charge of the value stream. That probably was one of the more complicated difficulties. So in conclusion, I think the improvement kata is a process improvement method that handles uncertainty and it scales up. We had really good success. The people who were using it were happy. We wouldn't have kept using it with them if we didn't think if it wasn't being successful. The Plan, Do, Check, Act was amazingly successful, and groups kept doing it after their official assignment to this had finished. They actually kept using it on their own, saying, this is useful and we want to keep doing it. So they would keep doing process changes on their own with that. We saw that decomposing by value stream instead of by function or organization is really critical. You want to make things run fast across a value stream, you need to look at the value stream, not at departments. So we think that you could adopt the improvement kata just within a team and just do the PDCA part and probably get value out of it. If you have a team that's doing retrospectives and ending up with some of the retrospective results that you're not really sure how to implement, that would be a really good place to try the improvement kata. And then you can definitely, the annual planning, making annual planning be less difficult and more successful would require adopting the improvement kata more widely, but I think it would be a big improvement over the way I've seen annual planning done in a lot of places. So I think in the end is that the improvement kata is a way to kind of marry the best of the annual improvements, the idea that you do want to set a goal for your whole company and you do want coordination across teams with the best of Agile, with the small batches and the immediate feedback and the cadence, and to put them together and I hope live more happily ever after. So you can learn more about this topic we're doing a workshop obviously on Wednesday, and I don't know, are any of you in here coming to the workshop on Wednesday? Okay, that's good to know. And Mike Rother wrote this book, The Improvement Kata. He's also done Improvement Kata Handbook, which he keeps updating every few months, which is like 150 pages, and it's got a bunch of slides in it. He also has slides that you can use. We use some of them here, so they've made that available free. And there's a couple articles, including the one in the proceedings. So the one in the proceedings has the references to all these other resources. And so you can look them up. So, time for questions. And we need to have the microphone so it shows up on the tape.
So I'm curious about the upward flow. You had this graphic that showed the hierarchy of the organization and the value streams and then the process people. And the targets are determined by the upper group. They basically they say, here's what you're going to work on. They pass it down to someone below them. And then my understanding is that every level below is basically allowed to come up with their own how they're going to solve it, what they're going to try. But they don't get to ever change the what. Is there ever any kind of feedback mechanism for levels below to say, well, you may have picked this what for me to work on, but I don't even see that as being the biggest impediment to my improvement. I think there's other whats that are more important.
Well, there is.
Does it ever go that one you had before, where it was like
so
those little things coming down? What does that look like, and what kind of examples can you share?
So what that looks like is it happens mainly in the coaching meetings. This is where new information is being discovered, and it's going back upstream.
Okay.
And because this is an iterative method, the where are we going is not fixed in stone. Generally, the top level goal is fairly static, but the top level goals usually are really broad. So things like, we want to be a lot faster. It would probably depend on the size of the company, how often that could change or would change. But this guy up here saying we're going to be a lot faster doesn't have a lot of assumptions about how you would be a lot faster. These people will make some assumptions, but the process of coming up with their target condition is actually not this person, it's not this person tells this person. It's a discussion, and it happens. There was too much to actually show the whole thing in this talk. We'll do this in the workshop in more detail, and I think in the paper in a little bit more detail. But the people they talk to each other about. So I want this to be faster. In development, should this be faster? And the development people are perfectly free at this point to say, no, I don't think I talked to somebody at a spin about 3 years ago that had this deployment problem where the development team was actually running at twice the speed of the deployment team. And so they had a 6-month backup of things that hadn't been released, and they were feeling very bummed out about whether they should even continue making new changes because none of them were going out for so long. And that's a perfect place during that discussion for the development learner to say, look, this doesn't make sense. How about holding off a week and see what deployment says? And then I'll talk about a goal, because I want to know why deployment is having so much trouble. Unfortunately, pretty often the development team doesn't actually have enough perspective for that. So the value stream learner would be the one that's noticing, because he or she is talking to both development and deployment. And it's like, this part's running a lot faster than this part. If you have value stream measurements in place, it's way, way better, because everybody can see what's going on and they can have reasonable discussions about that. Ooh, and I do have an example of that. Okay, so this is what happens if you do velocity measurements. This is a group that's doing development, and then they send stuff to system test. And then if you find defects and it has to go back, and this group's actually tracking that as another state. So it's gone through its first round of system tests, then it's going into fixing, then it's going into done. So if you ask the development team, how fast are you delivering? They're saying, I'm turning my features over to system test at this rate. This is my done, ready to turn to system test. Really common in agile groups and large organizations to say, done means I'm turning it over to system test. So here's their velocity. System test is saying velocity is this. Which one's right?
I would say that the final value is the one that's more right.
Yeah, the final value. And so if you graph them together, which is something you would do if you were a value stream owner, your value stream owner would say, look guys, this is what's going on. Here's your velocity, here's the actual velocity, where are we falling behind? it's in the fixing. We're letting stuff pile up and fixing. We need to do something about that, so whose job is it? So that's what the value stream owner should be doing, is making it visible to the different parties. But there's definitely feedback coming through these coaching meetings, and that's why you want them to be frequent, so new information keeps coming to the value stream owners, and from the value stream owner to the department manager, that if the plan totally doesn't make sense, then let's say so and revise and have a different target condition.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, can you talk a little bit about the PDCA sheets and kind of how the life cycle of those goes? So, at some point maybe you've gotten enough value out of your experiment to close it, and how you kind of close it, and also in your guys' year, how visible did you make those? Did you put them on the wall, or were they kind of internal to the coach and the leader?
Good questions. So we've tried putting the PDCA sheets on the wall. A lot of the pairs were not located in the same location, so they ended up putting them all in a SharePoint folder. And I think on the wall is probably more helpful, but that the SharePoint seemed to work okay. And that did have the advantage that when somebody wasn't there, the other people could still see it. The success card we introduced, because people were having trouble closing them out, they'd be chewing along with their PDCA and they'd actually finish the target condition and not realize it, and keep, pretty soon you've got a PDCA sheet that's like this long, and then they're 20 days in. So started working with the coaches to coach, watch for when they've succeeded, and stop and start a new PDCA sheet. So that's part of the method, is you stop, you finish, that PDCA sheet is done, you write another one with a new target condition, that, and you write a success card for the one you've completed to show what you've accomplished. Okay.
So I have a question kind of along that lines. When they're going down through the process on their PDCA, is there ever a point when they decide to give up on an experiment? Basically say, I've tried this, I've tried this, I've tried this. I throw up my hands.
So he's asking if there's ever a point in a PDCA where you throw up your hands and you give up. So science. Failed experiments are not a failure. Failed experiments are a learning. So we can definitely say, here's our PDCA sheet, we have tried this and we've learned something new, this doesn't work. And we've tried this and we've learned something new, this doesn't work. And yeah, you can get to a point where you are questioning whether some of your basic assumptions even make sense. And what you may find is you're saying a target condition actually isn't achievable. Let's go back up to the target condition above it and say, what was our overall goal here? So that's why we have the target condition and the challenge on a sheet, so that you can ask, it does not look like this is doable. Why were we trying this in the first place? How could we achieve that a different way? But we try to work with people that just because it doesn't work, that's not a failure. You've learned something, and you learn more from failures than you do from successes. Sometimes not stuff you wanted to know, granted, but you do. Any other questions? Yeah.
Assume you've got multiple product owners, some of whom are at cross purposes, and they, what are your strategies for they don't all necessarily see the same value. So what are your strategies for kind of bringing alignment?
So product owners who don't all see the same value in a proposed set of features.
Yeah, right.
Well, from an improvement kata standpoint, it'd be asking, first of all, that's an observation. What problem is it causing? Mm-hmm. So what problem are we really trying to solve? How is this hurting the business? Where does it get reflected in the business bottom line? And depending on how the disagreements play where is it hurting the business? Is it slowing something down? What would happen if you just randomly picked features and did them? I know that sounds heretical, but you're looking at how bad is it, and then that starts leading you to what would be a reasonable target condition. So it sounds, this one would need some investigation into what actually is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Doug's making noises like there's lunch out there. And we can continue. I'll be having a table at lunch, so you can follow and ask me as many questions as you want. So we're done. And